For some reason, the sound wasn't going through. You gotta love it when you have those episodes that, like I said, technical difficulties. It seems to happen every time. So let me start that again and say, good evening, witches, warlocks, sorcerers, adepts, friends, fans, family, and followers to Season 3, Episode 5 of the hit underground radio occult show known as Knights of the Nephilim, brought to you by Celestial Oddities Radio and the Coterie of Samil Arcane Occult Order. As always, I will be your host and guide on this journey into magic and mysticism, darkness, and divination. I am Frater Crow, and it's a pleasure to have you listening in this evening. Whether you're listening live, streaming after the fact, or you've downloaded us to your device for on the go, I do want to thank you for your patronage and support. Just make sure you click those buttons, which moves us up the podcast community rankings, allows more people to discover the show, keeps you in the loop with new episodes as they air, and gives you unfiltered access to our past archives. Whether it's this show, Knights of the Nephilim, which talks with occultists, authors, and theologians, and picks their brains on their thought patterns and their work. Whether it's Pong, Pair of Normal Guys podcast, which deep dives into the paranormal and supernatural. Celestial Oddities, Last Call, where we tell unfiltered, unrelenting stories, or Caniculum Obscuritatis, where we give you the foundations to build a practice from the ground up. We give you a lot of different information, so make sure you watch what shows you resonate with, but sharing them around certainly helps us out, and we appreciate that. If you've missed our last couple episodes here, our first episode of Season 5, we had John Vermillion and Orly Stewart, followed by our last episode, which we had Baba Yogi Kalanath Agori. Two wonderful episodes, and tonight is certainly not going to be any different. We have an amazing guest this evening. I do want to explain a couple things real quick, and I apologize for the technical difficulties at the beginning. It wasn't picking up my voice, and then it was. But the live portion, for those that like live footage, they like the live experience, you can see us across 4 different Facebook pages: the Frater Crow Facebook page, Knights of the Nephilim Facebook page, Celestial Oddities Radio, and the Coterie of Samil Arcane Occult Order Facebook pages. Those will stay up for 30 days until Facebook deletes them, unfortunately, after 1 month. But you can see this video permanently on our Knights of the Nephilim YouTube channel. So feel free to watch where you like. For those that like more of just the audio experience, people that like listening to it at work, at the gym, while they're driving, you can check it out on Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Deezer, Spreaker, Castbox, Google, Amazon, Apple Podcast, you name it, we're on it. Those are recorded live, but posted after the fact, usually around 11 p.m. on show nights. So you can always check those out as well if you are an audio person. I know a lot of our fans are. So it gives you a little bit of history about this season, what's happened so far, what's going on over here. We have much, much to come this season. We are excited to be back, and we are happy to have you listening in. Tonight, we are honored to welcome a voice whose work has illuminated the deepest currents of history, philosophy, and the occult. Baal Kadmon is not only an author and occultist, but also a scholar of religion, philosopher, historian, and teacher, an authoritative guide through ancient history, late antiquity, and the medieval world. Beyond his extensive catalog of books, he's sharing his wisdom in the classroom through immersive video programs like The Breath That Forms Worlds, Guardians, Fallen Angels, and the Genesis of the Nephilim, Ancient Egypt History, Hieroglyphics, and Magic, Meditation Made Accessible, and programs like Lucid Dreaming. From the mysteries of the Kabbalah to the Watchers, from mantras to brainwave entrainment, Baal Kadmon's work bridges rigorous scholarship and lived mystical experience. Join us this evening as we step beyond the veil into a conversation that bridges the academic, the experiential, and the esoteric. Guys, step into the circle as we bring on Baal Kadmon. Good evening, brother.
Good evening. So happy to be here. Thank you.
No, absolutely. It's my honor and pleasure to have you here again. For those out there listening, Baal was on one time before a couple of years back, so you can always go check that episode out at a different time. But we have a lot to unpack this evening, so we're gonna certainly jump right into it. Obviously, welcome. Very excited to bring you back. Pick your brain as someone who truly has just a plethora of knowledge in so many different aspects of esotericism and occultism. It is always just an honor.
Thank you so much. Honored to be here.
All right, so let's go ahead and jump into it. Tonight, guys, we're going to focus on Baal Kadmon's courses. So one thing that we wanted to talk about is obviously he is very well known for his books. I mean, I couldn't even tell you at this point how many books out. I would say well over 40 books. And a lot of people know him for that. But do you know about his occultcourses.com plethora of occult courses? Because if you don't, you really are missing out on a lot. So tonight we're going to talk about some of those courses. We're going to talk about the thoughts behind some of those courses without giving anything away, so that if you want to go out there and check out one of these courses, you can do so. And I certainly promote and push you to do so, because you will not be let down. I have seen courses, I have taken courses from many different people in occult over the years, and I will say that I have never found really one that's any better. And it's each and every time he hits home runs with these. So we're going to dive into those and really, get things jumping off of those courses. So let's go ahead and get myself pulled up here. So we'll start right off here, right off the bat. And Guardians, Fallen Angels, and the Genesis of the Nephilim. You combine textual scholarship with meditation practices. How do you bridge the rigorous, historical, critical study of texts like the Book of Enoch with experiential occult methods?
Well, that's a really good question. The concept of the Watchers and the fallen angels obviously has been known, throughout, thousands and thousands of years, and other traditions have sort of similar stories. And the way that I treated it, aside from the academic portion where I get into even texts that a lot of people don't even know about, right, that deal with these angelic forces, things that even go beyond the Book of Enoch, that are in texts that are in Hebrew or in Aramaic that have either not been in translation or they're sort of sparsely translated. So what I did, over the years, I've experimented with many, many different traditions, and that's why I write about everything. I write about everything that I have experienced. Okay, I don't write anything that I've never handled or dealt with before. So what I did, especially with the Watcher angels, is that I incorporated meditative techniques and sort of blended it with angelology. And I've done this before in other programs too, with other angelic beings. And so I found that they can actually easily be bridged, because the traditions are fairly similar. They're running through, there's a certain currents that run through them that are very similar. So it wasn't as difficult to bridge. I think the pride and joy I have in that program is really everything that actually came before the meditations, is the entire history of the whole idea of the fallen angels.
Absolutely. Very deep, very thought-provoking. And it's something a lot of people hear about in the occult, or they may have studied, or they may know a little bit about the Book of Enoch, but not in a sense where you are fine-tuning and deep diving into so many aspects of the Watchers and the Grigori, and really giving, like you said, a well-rounded understanding by not only using the Book of Enoch, but jumping into other texts that most people have never heard of, which really gives you the full landscape.
Right. Yeah, and that's something I try to bring to all of my programs. I try to cover them from as many bases as I can. And so I'll pull in traditions, and I try to make it as seamless as possible. Sometimes it is a challenge to jump from one era to the next and try to make it flow. And that's why the way I structure even my books is that I start from the broader ideas, and then I sort of move down and I sort of get more granular. But with the Watcher program, which, like I said, is probably one of my favorites, and it took a lot out of me to produce, I will tell you. But going through all of those texts, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Book of Jubilees, texts that people may not, or they might know of them, but they may not have read them. They have a plethora of information about the fallen angels, and also the perspectives of early Jewish philosophers, Josephus, Philo, the church fathers. I mean, there's so much out there that, I could probably create a second course if I really wanted to, if I wanted to get even more in there. But really, I covered I think, all of the main aspects in as deep as I could, and it was definitely a labor of love.
And your courses are, and as you said, I love how you do that. You start the courses out, you introduce the topic, you talk about a basic understanding of the topic to get someone started and rooted. And then, as you said, you get more granular and you dive deep. And when we say deep, folks, he dives deep. We're going into every aspect you could ever hope to know about a subject. He's hitting and then beyond that. And I find that refreshing, because you do find a lot of things out there of people just rehatching the same information over and over again, and you don't really get any further than you already have on your own research. Whereas any course that I've ever taken of yours, I'm sitting back saying like, oh, wow, like he's hitting a lot of things that I already knew. Absolutely. But I didn't know X, Y, and Z at all. And X, Y, and Z might be pinnacle to that subject matter. And that's what I love. And you don't get that unless you're really able to translate text as you are. And that's the big part, is I think your capability to look at a subject from multiple different languages and translations, different interpretations, is bringing a fresh breath to a lot of academic learning, because most people are only speaking one, maybe two tongues, whereas you speak quite a few.
Right. Well, to speak to that, I sort of have to thank my father for that, because my father was born in Israel, right, and so he brought me up especially to speak Hebrew, and his mother was from Yemen, and she was raised with Arabic. That was her native language. So he made it very, I mean, right from the beginning, that I would be able to speak those languages. I'm more fluent in Hebrew than I am in Arabic. I didn't use Arabic that often, but the Hebrew, and by extension Aramaic, because there are texts that are using Hebraicized letters, but it's Aramaic. It was the native language of the Jewish people during the Second Temple period. Actually, very few spoke Hebrew. Hebrew was mostly liturgical and used for religious, ceremonies and things like that. So that early upbringing gave me that foundation. And then later on, as I was studying the occult more deeply, I realized there are a few more languages here that need to be learned. And so I started from the beginning, okay, let's look at Greek, let's look at Latin. And that really came in handy for me. And I just kept on learning them and learning them. And a lot of them I know academically, and some of them, obviously, I can have conversations with. But it's been instrumental, and that's what I think allows me to, as you said, go deeper into a text that may not be as apparent in English.
100%, because there's things in the original writings that, through translation, whether due to error, whether due to specific political or dogmatic reasons, were changed to hold sway or power over someone. You're not getting that if you only understand the manipulated version of it. A big thing that comes to mind right off the bat, and you and I have talked about this at length prior, is the Lucifer fallacy, which is one of the courses, folks, out there that you can go and check out. It is a powerful, powerful course talking about the misunderstanding of Lucifer as a character throughout, a very, very long period of time. And it's all through mistranslation, creating pop culture, creating an entire culture that believes in a being that was never originally a being. So it's fascinating to understand how that can change the perspective of an entire populace off of something that is either, like I said, accidentally mistranslated or done for specific reasons.
Right. And that's something that unfortunately is very, very common when it comes to anything that involves religious texts, especially when they're coming into translation. Speaking to the Lucifer situation, that is probably one of the most consequential. And I wouldn't even know.
I'm losing you a little bit, Bo.
Do you hear me?
There you are. Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. Um, it's even beyond a mistranslation. It actually started as an accident, that they just happened to look at something and this word, and then the word eventually morphed into a name, because there is a Roman god by the name of Lucifer, but that was not originally a name in the Latin Vulgate. In fact, it was just a description. And it's so hard to tell in English, because if you're reading it straight, you don't see the nuance of that language. You don't see what's happening there. And the Lucifer fallacy is probably, one of the most influential fallacies, and it has influenced religion for thousands of years. And people will say, well, wait, well, who are you to dismantle it? I'm like, look, I present to you the information, and this is the information that is present, and it is possible. But because, and not just with Lucifer, with any type of ideology or belief, when it becomes part of your being, you are going to double down. I'm telling you that God himself could come down from the sky and be like, well, that's not the God I believe in, so they're not going to believe in it. So people double down on beliefs.
Yep.
But unfortunately, when it comes to translation, some people don't even realize that a text is in translation. I've seen people that actually think that the Bible was written in English.
Yep. Ignorance is it's a well that runs deep, brother.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't like to do the research, and you can't, like you said, you can't tell them otherwise. You can say, well, no, I'm showing you the proof that this was the way that I'm telling you. Nope, don't believe it. And it's like, I don't understand how you can't believe it. It's like showing you the crime footage. I'm showing you what happened, and you're still telling me no.
Right. It sort of reminds me of, I don't know if you're familiar or not, but with the whole concept of deconstruction, Jacques Derrida's, where everything you can't pin down, everything can be questioned. You know what I mean? And then it's broken down. But the thing is that there, the one problem with deconstruction is that, of course, it doesn't come up with any good solutions. And so, but there are solutions to things. There's evidence for things, and sometimes they are beyond a refutation and dispute.
Now, what are your thoughts on how would I put this? What are your thoughts on a just mere accident then being translated into English versions as Lucifer as the fallen angel who's fallen because of his own pride, because he wanted to sit on the throne above God? So now they're starting to mix, the Quran, thoughts of Iblis, with Lucifer, who never was the fallen angel. What are your thoughts on all of these things happening to then create such a hysteria where people were pouring fear and thoughts into this egregoric being, and then people were pouring love and admiration towards this being? And then you have a lot of occultists out there saying, well, whenever I conjured Lucifer and he came, he was a beautiful angel of radiance. And it's like, but did you, did you actually conjure? Is it your own mind? Is it your own fantasy? Or are you conjuring some type of, as I mentioned, egregoric being?
Yeah. Well, the Lucifer case is especially, I don't know if to say it's egregious, because I think at first it was not intentional. I think that the name sort of evolved, but it also fit a certain narrative, right? So you remember, most people use the book of Isaiah as proof of this fallen angel. It says, how you have fallen, O great morning star, right? You have fallen. Now, the thing is that when people quote that, they are quoting it in isolation. They're only quoting that verse. But if you move up a few verses in that chapter, it says everything to follow is actually a message for the king of Babylon.
Yep.
It's actually, so it actually tells you this fallen being that we're talking about here is the king of Babylon. It's not about an angel. It has never had anything to do with an angel. And the thing is that this is so common, especially when Christian apologists and Christian writers are using Old Testament texts. Like, for example, another one, I've given a few examples of these, but for example, it says, the story of Jesus and his family. They went to Egypt right after he was born because Herod was ordered the killing of all the young children. And then when God supposedly calls Jesus and his family out of Egypt and back into Israel, it says in the New Testament, as the prophet said, out of Egypt I called my son. So on the surface, you're like, oh, wow, yeah, it is talking about Jesus, isn't it? But then if you read the entire verse, the first half of that verse in Hebrew, in the Old Testament, says, the nation of Israel is his son. That's what the verse is saying. So, but you see what happened is they cut the verse in half, took the one part, left the other part away. And so this has happened so many times that, it's almost, it's, to those of us who study this, it's sort of a joke at this point. You look at it and it's like, oh my goodness, they just completely mistranslated this thing, or they cut it up, they chopped up the verses. And so what happened was a simple mistranslation, that even in the Vulgate, the way Lucifer was even used was the bright morning star. It was not even a name, so that's the weird thing. And then it just evolved. People evolved the tradition of these fallen angels. They mixed it with Lucifer. And another big red flag here is that if Lucifer is the leader of the fallen angels, why isn't he in the Watcher tradition?
Yep, exactly.
Because he's not an angel. He never was. So that's why it's just something when you think about it, it's like, wait a minute, why don't any of the fallen angel narratives have Lucifer in it? None of them do.
You think, yeah, especially since you'd think whenever they're mentioning Shemiyaza and Azazel, you think that they would mention one of the leaders being Lucifer if he's such an important figure, if he was the one who's fallen and became Satan or Hasatan, would be a part of the Watchers. And they start to conflate a lot of things because you have the serpent of Eden, you have the fall of the Watchers, and you have this conundrum of Lucifer, which isn't even a part of it. But if you want to make it a part of it, it doesn't match the other two.
Right.
And
exactly.
People want to crunch it all together as the three things, or the two things become three and they're one. No, they aren't. They are very separate circumstances that have nothing to do with one another.
Exactly. In fact, it's what it really shows is that the tradition is that there are two fallen angel narratives. There's one during the time of Eden, and then there's one in the book of Genesis chapter 6.
Yep.
If you look at the traditions. So because, there's also this notion, evil was brought to the earth by these fallen angels. I was like, actually, no, because evil was already here. If the snake is supposedly evil, that means evil was already in the Garden of Eden before, quote unquote, evil was even created. You know what I mean? So there's
you actually mentioned too, and I don't know if it was this course. Actually, I think no, it was actually another course which we'll jump into, but I'll mention a part of that. On the beginning of creation, of the 7 days of creation, or the 6 days and seventh day of rest, every day, and it was good, and it was good. But one day did not say it was good because it was the day that hell was created. And so how can there be the evil with the fall of the Watchers if you've already created a place for evil long, long before then?
Exactly. And not only that, what a coincidence that one of the trees in the book in the Garden of Eden is the knowledge of good and evil. Wait a minute, but evil didn't exist.
Exactly.
So how did the knowledge of it exist? That means that evil did not come about by any devil. It didn't come about it came about by God.
Yep.
That's how it came about. You know what I mean? And it's so clear. If you just think about it, how could if the snake was evil, the tree of good and evil is in a garden, which, by the way, the Garden of Eden, this is before it became corrupt. That means evil already existed. And that sort of ties into my latest program on the Sefer Yetzirah, which talks about, it's called the breath that forms worlds. If you look at one of the earliest Kabbalistic texts, it tells you right there, good and evil were created before creation. It was already there.
And I love that because that actually leads into a lot of my belief systems and practice, which I do work heavily with the Sitra and with the Klipothic shells in my own practice. And if you look at it from a Kabbalistic standpoint and how a lot of the ancient Kabbalistic texts talk about the three negative veils of creation and how there was that split and
Mhm.
it, there was evil before human beings ever walked the face of any earth. It was already created, and it is the shadow
Mhm.
side of God, so to speak. There was a creation, and as much as something wanted to expand and continue to create life, but it has to create life through consolidation and coming down, there
Right.
was another side that wanted to deconstruct and expand back out to reach back to the negative veil of Ein.
Exactly.
So it's very interesting, as you said, that right at the beginning, there is a tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Well, why is that the case? But people don't want to look into those deeper understandings. As you said, I mean, the Lucifer one, case in point, as you mentioned, a few lines later, just a few lines, these parables are about the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar. And they, it's like right there, but it's like, oh, well, I never read that much further. And it's wild because it's not even just the layman people out there that are believing this. Some are occultists, some are practitioners, but
Mhm.
a lot of people speak with authority that don't know the actual truths and haven't read further. I was on a show one time where it was me and a panel of 2 or 3 priests. And it was an interesting concept, obviously. And we were talking about biblical narrative and about different understandings of esotericism in our purview. And we started to talk about a lot of Christian ideas, and I just dismantled these priests. Like there was no understanding on their end. And you had different kinds. You had one who was a what am I trying to say here? Um different types of religions of Christianity.
Mhm.
One was a born again New Age follower. You had a couple other type of faith. I'm trying to remember. There's so many shows it starts to blur together.
Mhm.
But we started talking about things, and I realized there was a very limited knowledge very quickly. And I had to ask the one preacher. I says, "When's the last time you read the Bible from start to finish?" And he sat like a deer in headlights, and he says, "Well, I've actually never read the full Bible."
Right.
And I
Right.
said, "Sir, I got to ask, you're telling me you have a congregation, you preach every Sunday to a room filled with people about the word of God, and you've never even read in its entire body, at least with that one book, which there's many more." I says,
Mhm.
the entire word of God. He's like, "Correct." I'm like, that should be something you reflect on because that is an embarrassment, sir.
Yes.
And I says, and even if you read the Bible, I says, you still have no idea of God, because what God are we looking at? Are we looking at Jesus as God? Are we looking at Yahweh as God? There's very big differences between them.
Mhm.
And I started to talk about things even deeper. Jesus never said I'm the son of Yahweh. Jesus said I'm the son of man. I said, so we need to understand, are you thinking Jesus is Yahweh's son, or is he just a prophet who taught us to look within? And you could see that these priests were, a little outmatched. Um, but it was beautiful to hopefully spark something in their minds and the listeners' minds that dig deeper. Keep digging, because there's so many different layers, and that's why I like your courses, because you certainly do that. And that leads me into something you mentioned, which was going to be my next question. And that is going to be, in your course, The Breath That Forms Worlds, which offers a structured, multifaceted study of the Sefer Yetzirah, ancient, sacred, and famously opaque. What about this text drew you to create a full program for serious occult students? Because I will tell you, many, many moons ago, when I started getting into Kabbalism, I found the Sefer Yetzirah. Obviously, it's kind of a pivotal text. And I
Mhm.
remember the first time I read it, I'm like, what the hell did I just read? I'm like, I have no idea what this dude's talking about.
Yeah.
It was more, it actually damaged me more than it gave me. I'm like,
Right.
I'm really just
Exactly.
confused now. Your course is phenomenal, Paul.
Thank you.
Why don't you
Thank
speak
you.
a little bit on what influenced you to want to really break this down, since no one really seems to do so?
Well, thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate that. This was really something that I was working on for quite a few years. Actually, I started it before COVID, and then I sort of lost track. I was working on other things, but the Sefer Yetzirah is because it's such a pivotal Kabbalistic text, and I've read most translations. The first one I ever read was by Arya Kaplan, who's very well, he's has since deceased, but he wrote probably one of the most popular versions and translations of the Sefer Yetzirah. But the thing is that he was writing for a Jewish audience, okay, and a lot of the translations are either just translating and they're not giving you any explanation, or they're translating with the assumption that you know something about something. You know what I mean? And all my programs, I try to avoid that. I'm assuming that if you're coming to my website or my books, I'm assuming that you're starting from the beginning. And the reason why I do that is because I don't want to assume that everyone knows something about this or that. So after reading the Sefer Yetzirah, both in Hebrew and in English, several times I was like, and reading the translations, and I'm like, how can anyone understand this? I mean, it's like, if you look at everyone's translation, I was like, this doesn't clarify anything. And so I had this, I remember the day when I really decided to do something. I was like, you know what, I have to elucidate this. I have to write something about this. And that's when it really started. And over those years, obviously, when I came back to it, I've grown as a person too. That was several years ago. And, if you're not continuing to grow, you sort of stay stagnant. So as I've grown and became more experienced, I realized, new things about this book, and new realizations. And I decided I have to put this course out. And I'm so happy that I did, because even after producing it, I took it myself. Like, I listened to it again and again as if I were the student, saying, did I capture everything that I needed to capture? And I think I did.
You did.
And thank you. And I'm very proud of it. I think that this is, if people really want to understand the Sefer Yetzirah, I would really suggest actually taking a look at it, because I think there's a lot of good stuff there.
There is. And folks, if you're not really understanding what the Sefer Yetzirah is, it is the book of formation, and it talks about the formation of the Sephiroth. It talks about the formation of the world. It's deep, and without someone helping you along the way, like Baal, you would be lost in it, because it's really opaque. As I said, it's very obscure, and when you read it, as I mentioned previously, it actually confuses you more than it helps you originally. But when you have a guiding hand from someone who truly knows, it unfolds truly the formation of the world before you, and it's beautiful. It is a beautiful ancient text that is awesome to be able to see in a modern day, broken down like that. So thank you.
Thank you.
And that brings me to a question on, really modern times. Having practiced the occult since 1985, you've witnessed changes in how people learn esotericism.
Mm-hmm.
How have your courses and teaching methods, like video, audio, and so forth, evolved in your view, and what do you see them going from here? How do you see the methods and the platforms that we have now being beneficial to people compared to so long ago, who had only books to be able to read? Do you find benefits, and do you find disadvantages? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, when I first started out in the 80s, obviously there were, we didn't have internet, we didn't have any of those things. I used to go to occult shops. Like one of the most famous occult shop in Manhattan at the time was the Magickal Child, run by Herman Slater. And he was, his store provided pretty much everything you could possibly want in the occult. But again, it was all book format. It was audio tapes, and that was the thing, and then there's another, actually a place that's still open called Enchantments that still exists in Manhattan, which is actually a pretty cool occult shop too. I think it's the only true occult shop, at least in the lower Manhattan area.
Okay.
So but of course, there's also botanicas as well, which are also very powerful, strewn throughout the city, actually. But methodology wise, I think now, obviously compared to then, now, information is far more accessible. And I find that to be a beautiful thing, because I think that a lot of the occult knowledge, I know that just due to the term occult, right? I think a lot of this should be known. A lot of this information should be known, because it can change your life. It can change how you view the world. And the fact that everything is so accessible, I mean, I only see this getting more and more advanced. I mean, obviously, video is the way to go. I mean, obviously, everyone wants video. And then, of course, it'll transition into app, and it's already there in the app. I don't have an app yet, but, and who knows how it's going to evolve. But the beauty of our technology now is that it's going to become more accessible. Now, of course, there's a double-edged sword to that, right? There are people who will learn this responsibly, right, and learn it and to try to enrich, and there are those who will, abuse it. And there's always going to be that. And there was back in the 80s and back in ancient times, you can never avoid the nefarious player, in these things. Yeah. But I think technology has done wonders for the occult. I've even been exposed to, works that I would have probably never have been exposed to. And I'm really grateful for that, because there's a lot of, good authors out there that, I didn't necessarily know previously. And I'll read their works. I'm like, wow, this is very, very good, So I just think that it's going to get more and more accessible. And I'm okay with that. I like that. I like that people have access.
I do. I think it's important, to have access, as you said, to be able to find things that you otherwise wouldn't, because there are a lot of authors out there that would never, without the help of modern day technology, be able to get to the audience who would want to read their works. They could be pivotal writers. They could have a lot of great information, but only reach people locally in their area and never be able to really break through past that. And that's a shame. So it does allow for that. Now, if there's to be a downside of any of that, the only downside I would say is that sometimes there's so much information that there's an saturation. I know that, like, let's talk about courses as we have been. I know people that I've met before that are like, I'm trying to find what I'm looking for. I'm like, well, what are you looking for? I don't know exactly, but I've taken so-and-so's course and so-and-so's course and so-and-so, and they're naming like 15 different people. And it's like, well, you're not sticking with anything. You're jumping all over the place. And if you don't put any real time into it, you're not going to really progress anywhere. And that's whether it's your practice, whether it's your studies and research. I think that has become a problem where we're so sidetracked, especially think of like Netflix, for example. You have so much at your fingertips to jump and forth between different shows and movies and programs that the days of having to wait a week or two for your next show to come out is gone. And there was something to be said about that. Now you have it so quickly that you just consume and consume and consume. And guys, the occult is not something that you just consume everything you can rapidly. It's okay to do that, but you have to take time to sit with a lot of this information. For example, the Sefer Yetzirah course, you can't just pound through that in 2 days and then jump into another course. You need to sit with it for a little while to reflect back on, as Kabbalists did. They sat and reflected on ideas because it fully sat in their body for a while and in their minds, and it unfolded gateways and doorways within you that if you just gnaw on it, chew it down, regurgitate it out into something else, and then move on, you never really capture the essence of the program or the book or the lesson. And that is the point that I think people miss nowadays.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's also, I think, the double-edged sword of social media, is that it condensed our attention span. Whereas before we sort of had a longer attention span because you had sort of no choice, right? You didn't have as many dopamine hits before the modern phone. So I think what happened is that it essentially, made us, again, a shorter attention span, but also in some weird way, just quick fixes. We need that fix. We need it fast, and we need it condensed. And that's good for some things, but for topics like the occult, Western philosophy, Eastern Western philosophy, those are not things that, unless you're like writing an article, if you're looking to learn about it, these are not things that you can just flick on an app, and just say, okay, well, let's move, because that's not what these things are made for. They're these topics are made to be integrated into your life. Even if it's
100%.
just learning, if you just want to learn deeply, that's good too. But if you want to go deeper, it's meant to integrate into your life. It's not meant to just swipe on a reel. It's more than that.
It is, and I think, like I said, that's the only negative side I would say, because there's so much good out of it. But with anything, you're going to have that double-edged sword, and I think that is it for a lot of people. Is they're just looking for something else and something else and something else. Guys, you need to take time to mull on things, and this stuff we're talking about tonight might not be for a lot of you, because if you are someone who just wants to regurgitate it quickly and move on, you're not going to. These are deep concepts, deep
Yeah.
workings in texts. But if you are someone like myself who loves the mystical side, the mysticism, if you're someone who loves the historical and the philosophical side, I love academic reading. I love to be able to learn things. I think that there is an importance to both, to be able to obviously have
Right.
the book knowledge and the historical and philosophical knowledge, and then team that with your practical and occult knowledge. It really brings something full circle. And sometimes people only focus on one or the other, and that's great, but you're really missing out on a piece of the pie.
Right, exactly. And to speak to that point, uh, because I do write and produce courses on a variety of different topics, I've had people come to me, and I actually mentioned this in a podcast one time. There's like, oh, uh, jack of all trades, the master of none, right? And people use that as an insult. But actually, if you read the entire phrase, it says, jack of all trades, the master of none, oftentimes better than the master of one.
Yep.
You know what I
And
mean?
very few people know that's the full saying, and that speaks
Exactly.
volumes. It's like, well, you know what? Diss me for knowing a lot of different things, but knowing a lot of different things is better than that one subject that you know a shit ton about.
Right.
Challenge me. I got you,
Right.
head on.
Exactly.
So
Yeah. So it's amazing that actually is such a powerful quote right there, and it's okay. And I think some people feel about themselves like, oh, I'm learning all of this stuff, and it's okay. It's okay to learn things, but also try to incorporate it as well, to have it lift you up in some way.
yep. And people, there's a lot of different things that, like we talked about earlier, people skip lines. They just kind of take out of what you want. And the jack of all trades is one where that's been used in an erroneous way.
Hmm.
And it reminds me also of blood is thicker than water.
Right.
People use that phrase all the time, and it's like, well, you're saying it in the wrong context. You're saying, my brother, our bond is stronger than anything else out there. And the true saying is, blood of the covenant is thicker than water of the womb. And
Mm.
it's actually saying the opposite. It's saying the blood of a brotherhood that you share common goals on is stronger than the connection you have with family. And when
Right.
you look at that, you're like, that's the exact opposite of the way you just
Opposite.
used that phrase.
Exactly.
Study, you know what I mean? Do your studying.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. Well, a part of it is that also sometimes it's hard to know what you don't know, right? Because
true.
there's so much out there that it's sometimes it's hard to know whether you're actually covering all the bases. It's tough. It
It
can
is,
be tough.
because there's just so much. There's so much,
Yeah.
especially now that people are like, I don't know where to turn. And that's one thing about you that I love, is because students praise your clear, concise research. It's accessible, and looking at things that people say, it's clear and rich yet accessible. Your narrative style in your courses really hit all ends. And question I wanted to ask is, how do you balance depth with approachability, especially for beginners in the occult? Because you're going so deep, and it's so thought provoking and well researched. But yet it's something that we're seeing that people of all levels are leaving comments following your courses and saying, I'm an absolute beginner, and this was perfect for me. You're seeing other people who've said, I've been studying my whole life, and I consider myself adept in my knowledge, and I learned so much. You really hit all angles of student.
Well, I think what really drives that is I wanted to create something that I wish I had when I started. Because when I started, there was no guidance. There was nothing I could. I mean, when I used to go to to the Magical Child or enchantments or something, they would say, "Oh, buy this book," or buy this book. But the thing is that it didn't. Those books wouldn't explain everything. I was like, all right, well, okay, that's Gardinian. I get that, but I need something broader. I need something. So over the years, as I was learning and slowly developing my sort of method of teaching, is that okay? When I start an outline for something, I write it saying, okay, what would I want to see if I was starting from zero or near zero? What would I want? You know, and what I could wish that I had, right? And that's what really inspires me to write the way that I do and narrate the way that I do, is because I'm never going to assume that people have, and I don't mean to insult people's intelligence, and I even say that, but what I'm saying is that I don't want to assume that people know certain things are a given. Okay, I want to start from the ground because that's how I wish I had it, and that's really what motivates me to teach the way that I do.
No, and you do it. Like I said, that's what makes it unique. I think it really stands out. I mean, you span everything from the Kabbalah to Hindu mantras and traditions to Mesopotamian myth and beyond. I mean, it's really, really impressive. What unites these traditions for you at their core? I mean, when you're looking at what am I going to study, what am I going to practice, what am I going to put out there as content? When you look over this expansive knowledge of your books and your courses, what unites them all for you?
What unites them actually is something that I realized as I was going through because I think a lot of us go through dark nights of the soul, right? We go through moments in our life where we question everything, our beliefs, our everything. And I during different phases of my growth, from the minute I started studying the occult to the present, is I started to leave behind the dogma of different traditions. I started to see things more in a unified way. And as I was getting more and deeper, I was like, okay, I'm starting to see sort of spirituality, occult, and whatever you want, whatever other dimension, as being fundamentally part of a bigger tapestry. Like it's all like part of a puzzle, but it's the same puzzle but different parts of the puzzle, and that's what unites it. So I'm okay with saying a novena to St. Jude and also doing a ritual to Pazuzu. It's it because to me it's we're talking about something that is beyond morality. I think morality gets us stuck. The conventional ideas of morality gets us stuck into very myopic ways of thinking about spirituality. So I don't see a conflict personally of being sort of eclectic, because I do think it is part of the same puzzle, just different parts of the puzzle.
I love that you say that, because one of the things I was going to ask you is figures like Jesus, Mary, and the Talmud appear in your works alongside demons and watchers.
Hmm.
Do
Yep.
you see all these currents as compatible within one esoteric worldview? And you kind of answered that. You do. That if you take the feelings out of it, you just study it. There's a lot of fruit to be had there. I think a lot of people get thrown off by my posts and things because they see me as a dark practitioner of sorts, but then they see me constantly referencing the Bible
Right.
and referencing old Hebraic texts and different things that a lot of people in the left-hand path, and I don't even really like using that term anymore, but a lot of people
Yeah.
in the left-hand path are like, oh man, how are you calling yourself left-hand path and you're posting that? I'm like, because brother, instead of blaspheming the Bible like some left-hand path people want to do and they just kind of
Hmm.
spit on it, I'm like, I can take those same words that were for Yahweh, for example, and flip it and use them as the same potent message, but in our structure. And it's just as powerful, just used under a different paradigm. And with you not being able to see past that wall that you've only self-created for yourself, then you're really missing out. But if you tear down that wall, you have an expansive world in front of you, and you're missing out on it because of your own ignorance. And I love the fact that that's how you teach, is you say, you know what, let's bring down the dogma and let's just look at the heart of the matter.
Right. And to actually just speak to your point there about practitioners who sort of spit on the Bible and do all those things, by doing but in the same breath, they will say they don't believe in the Bible. So it's like, if you don't believe in the Bible, why do you hate it so much?
Yeah.
Why do you spit on it? And that's why I think a lot of practitioners say, they're against Christianity, but their concept of the demonological is a Christian concept.
100%.
So they're actually practicing Christianity light. I mean, it's just a different form of Christianity. By them acknowledging the Christian aspects of the demonic, they are actually affirming Christianity, not detracting from it. They're actually saying, no, Christianity is right about this.
Yep.
Even
I agree, because so many people will follow, even if you're looking at it from a demonological standpoint. Yeah, we're following. I don't believe in Christianity. I don't follow anything of it. I'm like, everything you've just mentioned, or you follow, either comes from Judaism or from Christianity. So you're saying you don't follow these religions at all. I'm like, and everything that you believe comes from the lens. I had an argument with someone who became very rude towards me once upon a time, who at one point used to look to me for advice, and he's a very well-known author, and then kind of spit in my face over things because of something I said about Lucifer once upon a time he didn't like, which is really funny, especially talking to you tonight since we talk so much about Lucifer. And I mentioned that, Lucifer was an archetype and he was a egregoric being. And I mentioned that if you want to get technical, you could say that Lucifer and Jesus are very similar to one another as well. And I gave a lot of strong points. Well, that ruined his friendship with me for some reason. And I said to this individual, well, it's really funny that you're going to end our friendship and bash me publicly over this. I says, when everything you follow and practice in your grimoire traditions is written by Hebraic hands, I'm like, everything you follow with your triangles, everything you follow with your circles is written from Judaism, from rabbis. So I'm like,
and Christianity.
So I'm like, how are you going to bash me when everything you write about and preach, brother, is Christian doctrine? I'm like, that's an interesting concept, bud.
Yeah. What's also ironic about that is that, okay, they're saying all these bad things about Jesus, yet Jesus is in their circle. What are you talking about? He's in their triangle. How do you not see the problem with this? And that's, it is very strange, because a lot of those grimoires that we have, from the Renaissance period and a little earlier, they were written mostly by Christians. You know what I mean? And actually, some of them were written actually as texts against demonology, just sort of documenting demonology, not for their actual practice. It wasn't meant for you to practice it. They actually wrote it sort of like, the Malleus Maleficarum, where it sort of writes, this is what the witches have done, and da-da-da. It wasn't meant to be a practice. It was actually against it.
Yeah, it was meant to create a book that they could pretend that they found and then use it to hunt down witches and burn them and drown them to take their land and money. So, there's a lot of obscurity there. And that's why, I respect the grimoire tradition. But that's not how I practice my practices, because I don't really resonate in that sense. I go about it a very different way. But it was always wild to me to get bashed by someone for having a view of mixing Lucifer and Jesus together in an archetypal way, whenever the person doing so, like I said, practices nothing but Christian doctrine, but blasphemes Christianity. It was just very strange. Now, your scholarship covers late antiquity and medieval history. Which overlooked period or figure do you feel has the most to teach modern occultists? And I know that's a tough question.
Oh my goodness. I don't think that there's one person specifically. I think that all of these time periods had individuals that either, helped propagate ideas or disseminated them. And now some of these people may actually be mythic. right? They may not actually be real, like people from biblical traditions. And a lot of those people in the biblical traditions, we don't have proof that they exist, and necessarily. But if we were to say, from the biblical standpoint, probably, and I don't mean this just in an occult way, is probably King Solomon. If you look at the book of Proverbs, the book of Lamentations, the book of the Lamentations and Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, actually, you find a lot of wisdom there. So that's also, those are very powerful texts. And then it's really hard to say across different time periods, because there were so many. I would say also, one a mystic by the name of Meister Eckhart, has had
Right.
a very large, a very big influence on me. And he was a mystic, and I would say that he has a lot to say. Obviously, he probably would not be very fond of us talking about him, because obviously he was very much steeped in Catholicism, but
Absolutely.
a lot of his work transcends all of that. All of those ideas. Some of it obviously did not, and some did. Like the eyes that I see is the same eyes that God sees. God sees through, or God is at home. It is we who have gone out for a walk, and all of these like really powerful sayings. So I would say Meister Eckhart, if you're looking for something that's very transcendent of yourself, that's he's a very good start. But again, you have to understand that he is writing within a particular framework, and that's what I think people need to understand, is when it's okay to read texts that you don't necessarily agree with the religions behind it, but you have to understand these are texts that were written in a very specific context and a very specific time. We read it now and like, oh, this is horrible, but back then it was just a different time period. So to sort of separate the author from the work, but there's so many, and we would need several podcasts to cover them all.
And his body of work, like, if we're talking about Meister Eckhart, is
Yeah,
phenomenal. I mean, obviously he is a Christian mystic. He's very
yeah,
devout in his practice, but his words, guys, are beautiful and truly um, just a depth that you don't often see in a lot of other writers. And
yeah.
I love that you mentioned him, because it's another thing that I think a lot of my fellow practitioners would be like, seriously, Crow, you're talking about Meister Eckhart influenced your practice? 100% he did.
Yeah,
And I would implore you to go read some of his work. Another individual I would say is very phenomenal is St. John of the Cross.
absolutely.
Amazing writings.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of meat there to be had. And it's just
yeah,
a matter of you saying, separating that dogma from it, just reading it for the beauty and the mysticism behind it. See, I've always told people that I'm a mystic first and a practitioner second.
absolutely. I would agree with that for myself too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's truth across any culture of the world, any time period. There are individuals who were in very different practices who spoke very similar things, and that, as
Hmm.
Aldous Huxley would say, the perennial philosophy that
Yep.
is strung between them is a gorgeous thing, and that is its own category next to magic. And like I said, some people only focus on magic; they don't care about the mysticism. You're doing yourself an injustice. Some people
Absolutely.
only focus on the mysticism, and that's great, but they don't do any of the practice. When you bring those two things together, you find equilibrium, you find balance, and you find a lot of personal growth and transcendence within yourself. And I
Ab-
really think it needs both.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing that's really important is that many people who read a lot of books and in all fields, in some way become there's like this patina of almost jadedness that comes over them because they've read so much. But I think really the key to learning anything, including the occult, is something really wonderful. And this is based on actually one of Meister Eckhart's sayings: is be willing to be a beginner every single morning.
Hmm.
And I think that is a beautiful thing, to wake up every morning and to approach this not only the occult, but whatever it is you're studying, is to come to it as fresh, and not assume that you know everything, because people do. They're like, oh, I already know this, but maybe actually you don't. You might not actually, and I think
That's
being,
very important.
yeah.
I
So
think being humble, as you said, is extraordinarily important. And it's one thing that my listeners, I know, certainly have heard me say for years, is I've always said, I am a student on his first day, hungry and eager to learn.
yeah,
And anytime anybody, is like referring to me as a master or a magus and things, like, yes, certain times you can use those terms for things. But I always say, no matter what, behind all of that bullshit, I am a student. I'm a student just like you. We're learning
yep,
together. We're building,
exactly.
we're growing. And the day that I think I have nothing more to learn is the day that I need to hang it up because I've never learned anything.
Yep, no, exactly, and that's why it's such a beautiful saying. Be willing to be a beginner every single day, and that is
Yep.
being a student. And as a student, that means you're in perpetual learning. There is never a time when you can say, okay, I've learned everything. It just doesn't happen. It doesn't exist. And if you, like you said, if you think you get to that point, then actually you're sort of in trouble a little bit.
It reminds me, there's a Hebraic term that I heard before called reaching the orchard. And it was
Oh
talking
yeah.
about reading a
Mhm.
text and finding that orchard within it. So you read, even let's say biblical narrative, you read the first base level, beautiful
Yeah.
story,
Hmm.
powerful, potent, you learn things from it. And then you learn more correspondences and things and more behind the parables. And
Yeah.
you get to the second level and you're like, oh my God, I read the same passage a year ago,
Yep.
but I'm seeing something different. And then you go deeper and
Yeah.
deeper. You get to the
Exactly.
exegesis of it. And then you get to that level where you've reached the orchard, where you're getting the true fruit of that doctrine.
Right.
And and the thing about it, guys, and what's beautiful about mysticism, and it's beautiful about really doing these studies and connecting these dots, it's something you can never really express to anybody in the truest sense, because once you reach the orchard, you could be standing next to someone reading it for the very first time, and
Right.
it's transcendent for them, and you're like, no, but you don't understand. There's a level here. There's a level, and you're saying the same words that they just read, and they're like, I get it,
Right.
man. And you're like, no, I can't explain it. I
Yeah.
can't give it to you. I can't
Yeah.
give you the orchard. And that's what's beautiful, is it's
Yeah.
your journey. It's your truth. Which brings me to a
Exactly.
question I really want to ask, and is, as both a philosopher and a magician, how do you define truth? Is it historical? Is it experiential? Is it mystical? Or is it all of these things?
Well, actually, that's a great question, because it'll port right over into what you were just talking about the orchard. Now, the thing is that, and first of all, the orchard in Hebrew, the what you're speaking of, is called pardes. Pardes is the orchard, and pardes is spelled. There's four letters to it in Hebrew. It's Pei Resh Dalid Samech. Samech, yeah. So the first one is the surface level, like you've mentioned. The second is sort of like the hints. The third is sort of like these inquiry. That's the homiletics, and the sod is the secret. And I think that all on each one of those levels, truth can be found. Okay,
Yes.
so there's no one answer to that. It sort of reminds me also of, and I think I mentioned him on the last time I was on, the American philosopher Ken Wilber,
I
and
think so.
he introduced me to a concept of something called holons. That one level includes but transcends the former level. So, to give a biology example, we have atoms, and then we have molecules that include atoms but transcend them, and then we have cells that include molecules but transcend them, and then organs which include cells but transcend them. So there's so each level has its own truth, and and they're all built on each other, and that's what essentially the orchard is. You can't have the secret if you don't understand the surface.
True.
You see what I mean? So you're moving up and up and up. So all those levels are necessary. So for me to answer, is the historical, and again I'm going to use a Ken Wilber saying, the historical is true but partial. The spiritual aspect is true but partial, because each one is looking at it from a different angle, but all together they create, I guess you could say, the concept of truth. But even that changes. Even the concept of truth changes, because as new ideas come, as new things form. But I would say every single aspect that I cover, history, language, whatever, magical practice, they're all true but partial, but together they create a more robust system. So
Yeah.
there's no way to say, at least for me, that one thing is more true. One level is more true than the other. All four levels need to be there. They all have their own truth. And if the lower level falls, all the levels fall. You have to have the superficial level. It has to exist before you can even interpret it in the mystical level. You have to have it first. And that's how it goes. It starts with a seed and ends up as a tree. But without the seed, that whole tree doesn't exist.
Yep.
You see what I mean? So
Absolutely.
that's how I view all knowledge, not just occult. All knowledge.
I love that, because it grows into the orchards. You said the seed first, the seed grows into the tree then grows branches, and the branches then grow fruit. And you will never get to that fruit without understanding the seed.
Exactly.
And like you said, it's level by level, and it is bringing history. It is bringing the experiential knowledge. It is bringing all of that together. It's just like we mentioned earlier with the mysticism and practice. You can become a mystic and transform your life without ever stepping into the circle, ever, so to speak.
Right. Yeah,
You can step into the circle and have all kinds of experiences without really understanding the knowledge behind it. But
exactly.
as we mentioned, you bring those two things together, it really unfolds, and they are two sides of the same coin. And talking about that, I want to kind of jump into some other subjects that are often misunderstood and see your interpretation or your ideas on. One of your courses, which I think our crowd certainly would love to check out if they haven't, is the course on Lilith. And your course on Lilith really deep dives into a very dense understanding of who she was historically, how she is seen in modern occultism, how she has been worked with, some of the erroneous things that have been said about her or understood about her. So first off, just wonderful course. If you haven't checked it out, guys, go check it out. But the question was, you also have a book on her as well. And your book, The Magic of Lilith, it treats her as a force of power and liberation. How do you see her role evolving currently in modern occultism compared to her ancient depictions?
Well, I think that a lot of the ancient depictions, clearly they used her as, I guess you could say, a scapegoat of some sort, because within the context of how these texts were written, there was a lot of fear around independent women. There was a lot of fear around that. And so notice in a lot of these religions, it's always the woman who's the villain, right? And unjustly. But this was unfortunately the norm at the time. But if you look at the story of what really was going on with Lilith, you realize if you strip it away of all the negative chatter and just read the story plainly, she is all about liberation. She is about that. She was like, no, look, I am equal to you. I am not from your rib. Okay, well, I am made from the same earth as you. That's what the alphabet of Ben Sirah says. I am the same earth as you. I was created the same earth as you. Now, within the Jewish context, that was threatening. Okay, but if you read the story fully, you realize actually she represents not only liberation, but she also represents something that is far more important that they don't want to admit. For example, when she takes the name of God, quote unquote, in vain, right, in the book of Ben Sirah, and then she flies away, notice what God, quote unquote, God does. He wants her back. He wants to bring her back. Why? Because anyone else who would have done that gets struck down. But he was like, no, we want her back. Why does he want her back? Because she represents more power than we can imagine. Even within the Kabbalah, it states that she is literally the mirror of the holy presence. She's the opposite side of the mirror. She's the opposite of the Shekhinah, which is the divine presence. She is literally the counterpart to it. So she is so important. Okay. And she is I would say probably the best representation of going against the system, going against the demiurge, essentially. Because if you look at the Old Testament as the God as the demiurge, right? She is counter to that. She is counter to rules and regulations that are arbitrary and stifling. She represents freedom, and she was willing to sacrifice everything for it. That's the thing. That's the beauty of that story. Two people say, "Oh, she agreed to have 100 of her babies die every day, right? Demon babies, right?" But she was so liberated in the sense that she wasn't scared. She was not afraid of God. She wasn't afraid of those angels in the end. She says, "You know what? No, I'm not coming back. Go ahead, kill him." You know what I mean? Go ahead.
And
And
it's interesting because she also right off the bat shows such power in other ways, because not only was she able to stand up and fend for herself and show that strength to say, I am not going to lie beneath you, Adam. I am going to be my own person. I want equality here. And then also go against her so-called creator, or the demiurge in this case. But whenever she wanted to leave the garden and fly from the Garden of Eden, she knew the Tetragrammaton. She knew the holy name of God, the unspeakable. And the way it's posed almost, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it would almost seem that she knew it, but Adam didn't know the name.
Absolutely. And I mentioned that in the program too. I mentioned that it seems as if that she knew more spiritually. She had more spiritual depth than Adam, because if you read the text, Adam sort of, pardon my French, he was a bumbling idiot. Yep. In the text. I mean, he was like, "Oh God, look what you did. You brought me a woman. She left me." Right. And he's crying over here. That's what it says. But meanwhile, she knows the ineffable name. He doesn't even know it. And, some angels don't even know it. Right. So the thing is that the fact that she just knew it, how did she know it? How did she know it? Yeah. Because she was meant to know it. Okay. She is far more important than any type of text will ever admit. The fact that she knew the name, even before, is just insane, right? She actually knew how to pronounce the name. And there is a story that says, if you know how to pronounce the ineffable name correctly, you can literally turn the entire universe back to Genesis chapter 1. Literally everything just goes back to the void. And she knew that name. She knew the name. And maybe that's why God wanted her back. There was fear because she knew how to wield that name. And with that power, she could do anything she wanted.
Yep. And maybe she went on to his adversary too. So as your book of Samil, a history, she finds the angelic host who was not willing to bend a knee to humankind. So now you have this feminine ferocity who knows the Tetragrammaton, who can do anything with that information and is unstoppable, because not only did she defy his law, she flew from the garden. When he sent the three angels after her, she blew them back with her power. She took up in the Sea of Reeds, or the Dead Sea, in the caves, and she decided to shack up with the angel that also defied God, and then created all of these opposing forces to his plan of formation and being of the demiurge. So it's very interesting. And as you said, it goes to further that whole demifying all feminine principles. I mean, whether it be Lilith, whether it be Eve ate of the fruit, and she then end up sleeping with Samil and giving birth to Cain. And it was Cain and Abel was not two from Adam. There was one from Samil and one from Adam. And that's why the serpentine bloodline killed the Claiborne in certain faiths. So, you start to look at that. You start to look at Nehemiah also being the reason that the Watchers fell. Or Rebecca giving birth to Esau, the red-haired one. And you start to look at all these things, and you're like, man, damn, they just demonified every important woman character ever.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And when they didn't turn them into demons, they turned them into very passive people. People that didn't have their own opinion. There might be one or two examples, like the judge Deborah Dvorah. She was very tough, but again, she was working within the confines also of a very masculine culture. So even she didn't have full autonomy. So it's just, but those that they worshipped and loved, they made them very meek. But those who were strong were villainized.
Yep, 100%. And I think it's fascinating to look at those characters of feminine principle throughout the biblical narrative, because oftentimes, at least from my standpoint and my practices, those are some of the ones that we admire the most because of the fact of what they did. Lilith was a force to reckon with. Even Eve decided that there was something more than just being told exactly what she could and couldn't do. You can have anything you want except for that. Well, that's kind of a sick thing to do, you know, to plant that there. And I just love the fact that the serpent come down and says, no, if you eat of the fruit, you will become like God. You shall not die. And she decided right off the bat, you know what? I kind of want that power. So as a lot of people say that's blasphemy, no, she wanted to see what the world truly had to offer and not just be a pet inside of a cage. And, you know, the forming of Cain, and people thinking he's such a horrible character, but yet if you look at him and you look at what he'd be responsible for, and him and Kolmana going to the east and making the city of Enoch, and then obviously that leading into the Canaanites and the Mesopotamians, and it starts to follow that trend, and there wouldn't be a lot of, if we follow that narrative at least, there wouldn't be a lot of the gods that we recognize, you know, as the other leaders of other nations and countries, because they, in this context, all stemmed from the bloodline of Cain, which all stemmed from Eve stepping out of line. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, but you know what's really interesting too is that in the Old Testament, the God of the Old Testament does not want humans to be knowledgeable. He does not want that.
Nope.
We saw that in the Garden of Eden, but we also see it in the Tower of Babel. They all went up. They were going up to seek knowledge, to be up to, but whenever humankind in the Bible gets to a point where they are seeking knowledge and divine knowledge, they get cut down.
Yep. I had a course called Good versus Evil that I've given a couple lectures on, and that was very much a part of it, was the Tower of Babel and how you named it right there. They came together as one nation.
One nation.
They built up a platform to try to reach heaven. So whereas it's looking at Yahweh's looking at it as a blasphemy, it's no, we want to honor you. We are so in love with your power, dear Lord, that we want to build up to you, to be closer to you. That's a beautiful thing. And he's like, well, shit, they're becoming too smart. I don't like it. Let's slap them down, and then let's divide them into multiple nations with multiple tongues that won't understand each other, so they're all left dumb and confused. And I don't know how anyone could read that part of just that one part of the book and not say, well, this is a sick bastard. You know, there's nothing good about this God. He's literally telling you, don't become smart. Don't think for yourself. Don't do anything of power. Just remain my plaything.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that's also where the concept of racism came from too, from that division. That's when it started. If you look at some of the old, some Talmudic texts, that was the time where it actually said where certain people turned into this and turned into that, and all of a sudden this division between people started, and this was all by the hand of this deity. Basically said, I'm going to divide you, and I'm going to make you hate each other.
Because we hate what we don't understand. And up until that point, everybody understood one another and everybody worked together. But all of a sudden, when they became separated and each nation given their own angel, so to speak, and everyone given their own tongue, then it gave people jealousy and saying, well, I fear them because I don't understand them. I hate them because I don't understand them. And I'm also jealous because they have a different ruler. And that's what a lot of people don't understand, is when nations were separated, every nation received their own angel, and that's where Israel was given Yahweh as their over presiding, you know, spirit, and they were his holy people. But some of the other nations that he just kicked to the side and split their tongue to talk in a different language, he cast off and gave them another spirit. But then later on, they condemn anyone who worships any other spirit. There's so much contradiction there.
Absolutely.
Now I want to jump into a question that Jim Ralston asked, and he said, has anyone saw or felt a connection between Lilith and Hecate? if there is nothing obvious but energetic, I seem to feel it.
I would say that I don't know if there's a direct. I mean, if we look at the stories, there's no, I guess, direct path, but I believe that they both have aspects that are similar. They're both, very independent, very powerful, and I can see how their energies can feel similar when you work with them. So, I mean, I can definitely see that. I feel them. I've worked with both. I've actually worked with Lilith far more than Hecate, but I have done quite a bit with Hecate, and it's just a different feel, but they can represent very similar things. So they're
I
not
agree.
necessarily antithesis to one another.
Yeah, I've never seen anything, Jim, that specifically, as Baal said, connects them together. I think that they have a lot of similarities because you have Hecate in her Empyrean realm stage,
Right.
where she's more of heavenly and kind of an angelic figure, in her chthonic stage. Well, Lilith, you have obviously the demon side of her, but also, as we mentioned earlier in the story of Genesis, God kind of fears, also respects her. She is the shadow side of the Shinan, and like there is kind of the both opposing sides, the light and dark, a queen or mistress of witchcraft and another one of witchcraft. They have a lot of parallels, though. I don't think by any means the Greeks created the story or worshipped Hecate as like a parallel to Lilith. I wouldn't believe that is the case.
Right. I agree with that.
Now let's dump into some other things that I want to jump into. The first course that I ever had taken of yours back to back, and I think that to me, I love all your courses, but these ones really just hit a certain frequency with me, and that's the 72 Angels of the Shemhem Mepharish and the 72 Demons of the Name, and they appear as complementary course offerings. Did you intend them to be two sides of the same magical coin, and what did students most respond to in each of these courses?
Well, because they are, well, first of all, what ties them is clearly their relation to the 72 name of God. Now, some of that tradition is older, some of it's newer. Like the demonic one is a little bit newer, whereas the angelic form of that was a little bit older. So they're essentially two sides of a very similar tradition, wrapped around the Shema Mepharash, which is the name, the 72 72 names of God. Now, I would say that from the two, first of all, those two have been, very wildly popular, and people have found that it's very, very complementary. But I would say that many people really resonated with the 72 demons of the name, especially because of they were already familiar with a lot of the grimoire tradition. And what I did, which is, I guess, sort of an innovation in this program, is I took the grimoire demons. I mean, there are more than 72 of them, but it depends on the different tradition you're looking at. And I made their names more accurate in the Hebrew, and I created sort of an alternative system. And I think a lot of people really resonated with that. But I also provided quite a bit of history about, the evolution of sigils and the different demonic names, the idea of Satan, the idea of good and evil, and sort of worked up to the demonic. So definitely 72 demon course has been probably the most popular from the two. But they are parallel programs. They are parallel programs,
and it's huge. It's a huge course.
There's like 200. It's a lot of videos. Yeah.
A lot of videos. It was I had read many of your books prior to that, but that was the first course I had taken, and I'm like, all right, I can't wait to take this. And I jumped in, and it just kept going and going and going and going. And I'm like, damn, Baal, like this is impressive. And I learned so much as someone who'd studied demonology for many years. I felt truly, as I mentioned earlier, like a beginner in this course where I'm like, wow, I feel as a student on his first day, I'm learning everything, even though I had already known so much. And that is a breath of fresh air for me. So guys, if you do find demonology, if you do find the spirits of the Lemegeton and some of the other names out there in demonology fascinating, and you want to find their roots, you want to find out about one of the 7 levels of hell that they may come from, Baal goes over all of that. He names the 7 Hebraic hells. He names everything. He names the 19-minute intervals that's best to conjure them in. I mean, it is truly, truly an in-depth work.
Thank you.
Now, do you think, and this has always been a popular conversation, do you think, because there's obviously 72 angels of the name, obviously the Tetragrammaton, and the 72 demons that everybody knows from, the Lemegeton, do you feel that they are directly correlative? Do you think that the demons are supposed to be shadow aspects of the same angels and they're really just 72 beings of opposite light and darkness? Or do you feel that the energies are not complementary of one another, that these 72 demons are completely separate from the angels?
I would say, just based on the traditions, I don't think that they're meant to be necessarily one-to-one against each other, because if you look at the angelic names and the demonic names, some of them don't necessarily pair one-to-one. These are 2 different traditions that are wrapped around a single idea, and so we can make those parallels, but I don't know if I don't think they were created with the idea that they would be parallel.
I agree.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people talk about that. I know that even some practitioners have gone as far as making the Master Mandala. Pokrongin did that, where he brings the 72 and the 72 together in exactly 72 columns and what zodiacal sign they fall under and how to work them. And you can do that. Now, it might bring fruits and results to it,
Right.
but that doesn't necessarily mean that was the way that it was meant to go.
Oh, yeah, it was absolutely not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have later texts that I think got conflated. The Testament of Solomon, I think, was a big part of that, because when he asked each time, what angel, what's the term he used? What angel conflicts thee or confronts thee? And then he names the angels that does. It started to really build up, and that's obviously old Grimoire practice, but I think a lot of people took from that there's these 72 names and 72 names. They started to bring it together, but the names that he mentions in some of the Testament of Shadows, or Testament of Solomon rather, isn't even always the names that are in the Lemegeton.
Right.
He names a spirit, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but I gave it in one of my courses at one point in time, that Jim, you might find it very interesting. He mentions a name of a triple-faced feminine moon deity that's a demon in the Testament of Solomon, which would be very interesting to the conflation of Hecate, of Greek. So I don't know, depending upon when the Testament was written, if that was meant to be a parallel there, but there is a demon in the Testament of Shadows that is a feminine deity with 3 faces that is directly aligned with the moon. So it is interesting sometimes to try to find those parallels or see how they maybe are different.
Well, the thing is that the thing with that book specifically, the Testament of Solomon, it's very influenced by Greek. I mean, I think even the name Eros is there. I mean, and even allusions to Jesus are there. So this is a very syncretic text. And regarding the spirit you're talking about, it's Enepsigos.
Yes, thank you. I used to know it off the top of my head, and I'm like, oh shit, I'm on the spot right now, and it's gone.
Yeah. No, because that's a difficult one. Actually, when I mentioned her in one of my books when I was reading, I kept on having to say it, and then I was like, all right, let me see how this is exactly spelled. And so Enepsigos, and she could be related in some way to some later ideas of Hecate and all of that. So but that already shows you that the Testament of Solomon is a syncretic text.
Absolutely.
because there are so many references to that are just also very Christian in origin. The one who will die for us. Remember that one of the demons is depressed. He says, "Why?" He says, "Oh, because someone's going to come and and it's essentially a Jesus figure." So
In mentioning the king, Solomon, how earlier how you said he's such an important biblical figure. He's the last
yeah.
king of Israel, and
Hmm.
he obviously built the temples of Jerusalem, and he was a wizard or a sorcerer. He's commanding and controlling demons. But then I find that the Testament's also very interesting because how it did kind of flip flop it, and it says about how because of possibly the Queen of Sheba, who is also
Hmm.
sometimes said to be Lilith,
That's right.
that he did fall off track and he did start
Yeah.
worshiping Molech and he did start
Hmm.
worshiping gods of other nations. I find that to just be such an interesting thing of how this fell into the storyline of the great King Solomon, that he was a devil worshiper, so to speak, at a portion of his life.
Yeah, I mean, even in the Bible, it does say that he gave some of the, because remember he had like 1,000 wives and concubines and everything, and some of them he actually allowed them to worship in the holy places. Their gods and goddesses. So yeah, I mean, he definitely has a history of supposedly falling, spiritually at some point.
Absolutely does, and I always love that too because how he gives Asmodeus the ring, and Asmodeus
Right.
backhands him across the
Right.
nation and takes over him. And I think there's even some line that like Asmodeus is like sleeping with his wife and
Yeah.
doing everything as him while he's gone. And I just find that to be
Right.
hilarious that they had some comedy in
Yes,
their
yeah.
their
Asmodeus
writing.
is one day I'll write something on him. There's so much about him in
So
the in
much.
the tradition. Yeah.
And I think that would be wonderful because that's actually where my occult path started with King Ashmedai, and it still is. I still have a specific devout practice only to him. So I have multiple practices that I do, but I do have one that is not to a pantheon or anything. It is a specific practice to him. I've always found him to be a very powerful energy to work with, and
Absolutely.
as you said, the lore and myth of him is just expansive.
Yeah.
Now, I want to get your thoughts on this as we come towards the end of this segment. Something I've always found interesting and I've spoken about at great length is parallelism in certain things. And obviously, when we look at Christianity borrowed a lot of what their practice or what their book is off of ancient pagan cultures and rites. They've taken things from Egypt, they've taken things from elsewhere, they've gotten rid of what they didn't like, added in what they liked, and kind of came up with their own corpus. Now, what I find interesting and a lot of people are not aware of is the parallelism between Jesus and Moses. And folks, when
Oh
I
yeah.
talk about this, is you look at Moses being sent down the Nile to save his life. You look at Jesus as a child running from King Herod to
Hmm.
Egypt to save his life. You look at Moses, you know, having the great exodus and leaving Egypt, become
Hmm.
the master and the prophet. You look at Jesus showing up on camelback, or excuse me, on a donkey, um, later in life, as all of a sudden this prophet that had been gone for many many years, and now he's here and Jesus emerges
Hmm.
into the story. You look at the how water is important, not only because of the going down the Nile River, but Jesus walking across the water to his apostles, and the baptism of John the Baptist, and how these are moments of power. You look at the fact that Moses held up the brazen serpent on the cross.
Hmm.
Then later on, Jesus is crucified on a cross. Moses' successor was Joshua.
That's right.
Jesus is Yeshua, which is Joshua.
Joshua. Hmm.
When you
Exactly.
look at this, isn't it quite interesting? What are your thoughts on the fact that, I mean, it's really a slap in the face, clear as day, that
Absolutely.
Christian ideology said, you know what, we're going to take these pagan cultures, these pagan rites, we're going to take these Hebraic, Judaic writings, and we're going to kind of hodgepodge them and make this new figure named, Yeshua, and
Hmm.
make him the savior and make the New Testament,
Yeah.
and reach a whole new segment of the world with Roman help and Roman hands. What is your thought on that as being able to do it? And how do you think that, I mean, how do you think it's grown so much, being so obvious, and how does it have damaging consequences as well?
Well, with especially with Moses and Jesus, obviously, as you said, their survival, their coming out of Egypt, both of them. Also, the numbers. For example, Moses spent 40 years in the desert. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness. Right?
Hmm.
They both performed, the miraculous feats and all of that. Uh, and obviously even the Mount Sinai thing, right? Moses is giving the 10 commandments on the Mount Sinai, and Jesus is doing the Sermon on the Mount. I mean, there's a lot of similarities, and that essentially they're doing the same thing, but in the context of where, the time period that they're in. But I mean, it is plain as day. We see this all the time in all of these texts. Uh, it I would say that if you're reading these texts for their spiritual value, then the historicity of it isn't as important. Uh, because I think in our culture, we think very linearly. Like we think that, you know, time exists in a very linear fashion, and things have to be a certain way for them to be true. But when you're talking about spiritual concepts, we can't really apply time to them. We can't apply, we can't concretize them, because when we do, that synchronicity, that the fact that one culture is borrowing from another would be considered blasphemy. Because if you take it literally, then yes, the fact that they're together, that they have these similarities, pointing that out and saying, okay, well, the Christians took it from another culture, that would be considered blasphemy. But if you look at these concepts as something bigger, then it's not blasphemy. It's a beautiful thing. It's a syncretic human experience, and it's trying to convey our spirituality in some way. So it really depends how you look at it. I love it myself. I love seeing those connections. I love seeing how oh yeah, this was definitely borrowed from, this or that. And to me, there's a beauty in it. It only becomes dangerous is when it's turned into a dogma. And once you turn it into a dogma, you can't debate it. Even if I have proof that the Christmas tree is actually a tree to Asherah, right? It doesn't matter, because the dogma says, no, that is not the case. Christmas, I'm just throwing in the Christmas tree, but I see it ideologically as fine, but once dogma comes into it, obviously it's considered blasphemy. But I love those correlations myself.
Well, I think that, how do you repackage it? I think that they were looking at, we want to reach a greater audience, form a new religion, but we don't think that the whole world is going to accept this Jewish concept of the way of thinking.
That's right.
So they brought together, obviously, the myth of Osiris rising, and they brought together Moses' story, and they've kind of taken those other pagan elements and said, if we repackage this, we could make one hell of a story.
Oh, and I mean, politically, politically, because it was a largely political move, to get people to believe in certain things. It was definitely underhanded. It was definitely underhanded. It's definitely deceptive, because they knew. That's why Paul was like, oh, you don't have to circumcise anymore. You don't have to eat kosher anymore. You don't, to make it more palatable. So they took ideas from the polytheists and brought it in. And that's why Christianity became so popular, because they were able to take, like you're saying, these different messages and sort of push them together. So on a surface level, it's deceptive. It's a tool of control, trying to persuade people to believe in what they want you to believe in. But also, if you look at it from a larger perspective, you can also see, it speaks to this larger need of humanity to capture these stories, and to make them part of our spirituality. So there are a few ways to look at it, but on a very practical level, that that bringing together is deceptive for the most part. Trying to force something just to have converts.
And it does also, as you said, there's a beauty to it in the sense that a lot of, as we mentioned very early in the program this evening, a lot of the left-hand path wouldn't know anything that they know without there
Exactly.
being this deceptive practice of Christianity forming from
Right.
other practices. So
Right.
you could say at the same time, yes, Christianity murdered and, silenced a lot of cultures out there that if they weren't silenced, maybe we would have learned it from the root.
Right.
But maybe we wouldn't have, and it would have obscured into something else. So we can't know that. But through those changes, we learned it in a very different lens and way. And it brought me into a question I was going to ask, which we kind of answered. Talking about your ancient Egypt history, hieroglyphics, and magic course, you combine dynastic history, linguistic study, and ritual practice together.
Yes.
How important, and you kind of mentioned this, but we'll touch it again. How important is historical context for ritual effectiveness?
I would say the beauty of of ritual effectiveness and placing it within a historical context, I think it's important because this way you have more knowledge when you bring in certain elements to your rituals. You're not just flying blind. You're not just saying, oh, let me just do this and that, because these rituals and these beliefs evolved in history. I mean, these are the rituals themselves are history. They're not just these side practices that developed. Spirituality and religion has evolved through history with other aspects of history. So I think it is important to know at least some of the context. Listen, you can syncretize the rituals. That's fine. I'm okay with that. But it is actually very beneficial to at least know this concept evolved historically during this period, and this is why. I think that's very, very helpful.
No, I would 100% agree with you. And you give that. There was a lot I learned in that course too, that I'm like, yeah, I know a decent chunk about Egypt. No, I don't. No, I didn't. Like as I started listening, I'm like, okay, I didn't know that, and I didn't know this, and I didn't know that, and wow, that's completely the opposite of what I thought I knew. It was beautiful, and that was one of the early courses. Obviously, it's been around for a while. Beautiful course, very expansive, a lot of knowledge, guys. And this just goes on to say, what we've been hitting at all night, not to beat a dead horse, but these courses will give you everything and then some on the subjects that Baal teaches on. Now, I want to throw a couple things up here. If you guys are very interested in his courses, he has been so kind to add a promo code. So if you go to occultcourses.com and you use KOTN for a promo code for Knights of the Nephilim, that'll give you 25% off of any one course or your total bundle that you buy. And that is a wonderful discount that he's giving. 25% is huge. So guys, go check it out. Learn, expand your knowledge, because I promise you, and this is not something I do often, I promise you, if you go take 1, 2, 3 or more of his courses, get back in touch with me if it didn't change your life, because it will. It's going to completely unfold you, and that's what we're all here to do. So once again, that is KOTN for 25% off of any one individual or package of things that you're purchasing through occultcourses.com. Make sure you check out everything else while you're there. There's something for everyone. Now, let's see what the last comments we have here. We'll jump into maybe one more question, and then we'll wrap up if that's good with you.
Sure.
All right. So we have... Jim says, what briefly is your thoughts on the anti-cosmic trends of certain left-hand path philosophy and practices? He also says, correct, all of the courses are premium level knowledge. They certainly are. So let's jump back to the first part. And Baal, he's asking, what are your thoughts on the anti-cosmic current that is pretty heavy in the left-hand path?
Yeah, well, just as far as I understand the anti-cosmic from what I've seen is basically it's an ideology that sort of rejects the concept of the created world, right? And seeks to either destroy it or transcend it. It depends. Like if you're looking at it from a Gnostic point of view, yes, you do want to trust. It is sort of anti-cosmic if you were to counter the demiurge, but it's. I'm seeing it also, but I haven't really formulated a really deep ideology around it. But anything that's it rejects the created world or seeks to transcend it or destroy it is not necessarily a new concept.
Not at
You
all.
know, you know what I mean? So it's just now it's the term anti-cosmic is sort of cooler, but the thing is that in other religions they've been trying to do this all the time.
Well, it's very Gnostic
Yeah.
in origin. I mean,
Gnostic. Yeah.
Valentinian Gnosticism, Sethian
Yep.
Gnosticism, the Cathars. I mean, all these groups were doing something very similar thousands of years ago. In fact,
Absolutely.
a lot of them pre-Christian believed that we were in a demiurgos or a demiurgic world,
Hmm.
and that even something is normal as bearing children or having sex was a sin, because to bring anything
Yep.
into this world was to trap the sparks of the divine within flesh. And the
Right.
second you put force into form, it starts dying, and then you're trapped in the karmic wheel. There was a lot of these thoughts, Jim, that went on. And as someone who does bring elements of anti-cosmic Satanism or diabolism into my practices, I respect it in certain ways. But the problem that lies, Jim, is that it's just a short jump and a skip from having Gnostic perspectives or anti-cosmic, if that's what you want to call it, to being beneficial in life, because there is a way of looking at this as a prison and to better your life, live the best life you can, to break free of the pleroma and past it. Or there is a fine line to go into a nihilistic, misanthropic, I hate everything, existence is a sin, and pretty much everyone should die, and I hate everything. There's a lot of that in the left-hand path, and that's unfortunate, because I take the other side of it. I can see in that darkness there being fruit there that can help you launch your growth. But there, like I said, it's too many people that take that as, pretty much it's a free-for-all. Do what you want.
Right.
And nothing has any meaning. It's very nihilistic, and pretty much there is no evil, because if I'm doing evil and then I'm gone, I'm just, furthering the cause. No, you're not.
Right.
That's not how it works at all. So it just depends on what perspective you take, Jim. But I think that it can go to extremism, as anything can. Right. But there are some seeds there, but it's not new. People like to look at it, as Baal said, as something new. No, it's just repackaged Gnosticism in a darker tone.
Right.
It's Gnosticism and goth.
Right.
So Joni says, amazing interview, guys. Two masters. Truly, thank you, Joni. Appreciate the support. So the last thing I'll throw here, and then I'll let you do any closing statements that you would like to do. And while we're doing that, I'm going to throw up this QR code, guys. If you like the show and you want to support it, this is buy a coffee. What that means is you can do the QR code, send a couple bucks to buy a coffee, because your coffee gets me through my day and your support gets me through my month. So feel free to buy me a coffee if you like the show. I don't care about making money on the show. I never have. I've never cared about making money with any of my occult practices, but I do like giving knowledge, and from time to time, it's nice to see that reciprocated. And I am a fond lover of coffee. So feel free to buy a coffee if you like what you hear. So the last question here is I was going to ask is, across books and courses, your mission seems consistent: to blend scholarship, meditation, and magic into straightforward, no frills practice. If there is one enduring lesson you hope students retain long after the course ends, what would that be?
And that would be to continue learning. Don't ever settle and think that you have learned everything. Just keep on learning and keep on growing, and use the knowledge to uplift yourself and uplift others as well. That's what I hope people will do.
100%. I couldn't agree more. So you heard it, folks. Hopefully you enjoyed tonight's episode. You took a lot of knowledge and information from it. Please pick up some of his books. There is an endless catalog. Like I said, there's like 45 books or something like that. Go pick them up. I've read probably maybe 24 at this point, and I'm always loving what I'm finding. And then obviously what we talked about this evening is the occult courses at occultcourses.com. Go check it out. Use promo code KOTN for 25% off. Find a new course. It's worth it. Do it. You won't regret it, I promise. And other than that, Baal, any last things you would like to say or promote?
Well, I just want to say thank you for having me on, and I want to thank everyone who showed up to listen. I truly appreciate it. I appreciate the support, and just keep on learning. Keep on learning. Don't give up. Don't get caught up in hype and everything. Just stay focused and stay true to yourself.
100%. You can never learn too much, guys, as we said earlier. Just keep digging deeper.
Yep.
So our exploration tonight has been a journey through text and teachings, from the Sefer Yetzirah to the Watchers of Genesis to guided meditations that we touched briefly on. Baal Kadmon's courses have offered deep engagement with both historical depth and inner experience, inviting students to hold scholarship and practice within balance. His work reminds us the magic and mysticism are not relics. These are living currents, accessible to anyone willing to study, meditate, and reflect. We're profoundly grateful to have had him guide us this evening, and thank you, our listeners, for walking beside us on this path. Until next time, stay searching, stay exploring, and never stop questioning the mysteries. I am Frater Crow from the Coterie of Samil Arcane Occult Order and Celestial Oddities Radio. We'll catch you next time, right here on Nights of the Nephilim.